All right. Hello, everyone. I'm gonna just wait one more minute. We got a couple more people hopping on, so let me let them join. And then what I'd like to do is set things up. So just be patient with me for a minute, and we'll get going. All right, so I'm going to get going. I don't want to take too much time away from our discussion session. I'm so thrilled to have President John Garvey with us for our session this afternoon to lead us through a conversation on study and the intellectual life in the role of the Catholic life. Our conference, obviously, this year is investigating the virtues and practices of the Christian life and the connection between all of these. And I think that as a leader of Catholic education in America, President Garvey has a lot to offer that conversation. For those of you who are new, who are joining for the first time today, my name is Chris Fisher. I am the executive director of the Portsmouth Institute, and it's nice to see you all over Zoom. Although you know, in person would be better, but we're going to do what we can here in this format, and we're so thrilled you could join us for it. And hopefully next year we'll see you here on campus. Those of you who have been on, you've heard this speech before, but I'm going to just give the instructions real quick to those who are new. What we're going to do is, in a moment, I'll hand it over to President Garvey for a 5-minute summary, encapsulation of his interview that he provided us with last week. And what that will do is give us just an entree into the conversation, remind us of some key points, and give us a source for which we can then go into our discussion. If you have a question, please use the Zoom function to raise your hand. What you can do is click on the Participants tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you go all the way to the right, when you do that, there's a function where you can say raise hand. Okay, so if you have a question, raise your digital hand, and then I can see that the question's there to be asked, and I'll call on you then, and we'll go through one by one. When you ask your question, when I call on you, just be sure to unmute, say your name, and if you'd like, your institution affiliation, and then you can ask your question. And then when you're done, just remember to lower your hand. I have everyone muted right now, but remember to unmute when you go to ask your question. And as always, as Jordan, my colleague here, has been doing throughout the day, any resources, books or articles or videos that President Garvey mentions, he'll send those through the chat function. I want to take just a quick minute again to thank those sponsors who are making this possible: the Center for Catholic Studies at the University of St. Thomas, Thomas Aquinas College, the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, Cluny Media, the Manquehue Apostolic Movement, the Aquinas Institute at Princeton University, the Providence College Humanities Forum, the Grace J. Palmisano Center for Campus Ministry at Merrimack College, the Brown Risley Catholic Community, the Collegium Institute for Catholic Thought and Culture, and the Center for the Restoration of Christian Culture at Thomas More College of Liberal Arts. Such a great group of people on board. Okay, so that's a little bit of an intro. I don't want to take much more time, so let me hand it over to President Garvey to give us some introductory remarks, and then we'll get to Q&A.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks to all of you for joining me on a Saturday. It's nice of you to give up some of your time. Thanks too to the abbot and the monks who are joining us. It's nice to see you all. Let me say a few words about what my podcast was about. This is a subject I've talked about at great length during my time as president at Catholic University. At universities where we're all academics, we think that intellect is the key to the virtuous life. If we can figure out the right thing to do, then we'll do it. This is a very Platonic notion. But Aristotle says it actually works the other way around, and I think he's right. He says in the Nicomachean Ethics that if you want to listen intelligently to lectures on ethics, you must have been brought up in good habits, he says. Virtue leads the intellect to the right result rather than the other way around. And in our efforts, Aristotle says, virtue makes us aim at the right mark, and practical wisdom makes us take the right means. Cardinal Newman gave an example of this in one of his sermons about St. Augustine. He was talking about St. Augustine when he said that if we fall into bad company, we develop a distaste for good, and we begin to fashion our own ideas to fit the life we're living. And after a while, we're led off the path altogether. I've observed this in my own life, and you may have done so as well. I have a weakness for a particular sin, let's say, and after a while, I start telling myself, well, that's not so bad after all. But my bad habits lead my intellect down that path. Here's a different example from the field of aesthetics rather than ethics. Our appreciation of beauty in art and music, in poetry and architecture. It's not, in the first instance, an intellectual judgment. We talk about the sense of beauty or the experience of beauty or the love of beauty. So this is another case where our heart goes first and our intellect follows afterwards. Let me give just one more example. This from my own life. When I was one of 8 children, and when we went off to college, my mother would always say, don't forget your prayers. I remember after I got out of college and out of law school, I was living in New York working for a judge, and she came to visit me in my apartment in New York. And I was telling her about a book that I just read. I think it was by J.N.D. Kelly on early Christian doctrine. And I asked if she knew that the words light from light that we recited in the Nicene Creed were meant to resolve the Arian heresy about the relation between God the Father and God the Son. And I remember her saying to me, dear, the important thing is not that you understand it. The important thing is that you believe it. I remember thinking at the time how my family are famously anti-intellectual, my father and mother both, but I remember kind of chuckling to myself at the time about how she was exhibiting that trait. But the older I get, the more I find that my mother was right. I don't mean to embrace the full import of her observation. The Council of Nicaea was really important, and I'm for it, and it meant to iron this out. But Mother was giving me the same advice that she had done when I went off to college. The important thing is to say your prayers before you go off on your intellectual wanderings. I remember reading in Pascal's Pensées precisely the same thing. After he describes the reasonableness of his wager, here's what he says. The external must be joined to the internal to obtain anything from God. That is to say, we must kneel, pray with the lips, etc., in order that proud man who would not submit himself to God may be now subject to the creature. Custom, without violence, without art, without argument, makes us believe things and inclines all our powers to this belief so that our soul falls naturally into it. So Mother and Pascal are 2 good authorities. And the last thing is about the university. You can see how this might bear on life at a university. Our students, young people, grow up a lot between the ages of 18 to 22. It isn't all just in middle school and high school like at Portsmouth Abbey. And half of our job as a university is to see that they become good Christians and citizens. How we help them to shape their lives in residence life, how they eat and pray and play, and what is the culture in which they're immersed. In short, living a life of virtue. This has everything to do with their intellectual development. It helps them to grow in grace, and if we help them do that, then they'll grow in wisdom in the right direction. So that's what I'm trying to say in my podcast. I'm happy to take questions. I think this is to be a conversation. So what might you be interested in hearing from me?
That's great, President Garvey. And if you have any questions, anyone, feel free to raise your hand with the Zoom function, and we'll get going on that. And if I might ask, President Garvey, one thing you mentioned was the kind of unique aspects of university life with the residential component and all that, similar to what we have here at boarding school. But I wonder, what are some of those ways that um, a residential community can encourage those good practices, those good habits that then dispose them to the life of the classroom and the life of virtue in general?
As it happens, this is a very live question at universities nowadays because we were more or less shut down beginning in the middle of March when the coronavirus landed. So everybody has been conducting their classes like this. And the question we've had to ask ourselves is, how is this different from what we're used to doing in the classroom? I mentioned this class to Chris, a class that I teach on the virtues in the spring. And I teach it to 25 freshmen in the honors program. We meet one Monday and Friday for an hour and a half. And so we got halfway into our class, the kids went off on spring break, and then bam, they never came back. So, but as it happened, I'd seen this coming, and in February I said, let's just try doing a Zoom class so that so that if something bad happens, we can be ready. So as it happened, we were able to launch our class on Zoom, and I'd say I gave it a B+ maybe for the rest of the semester for this part of the discussion. But I talked a lot with the kids afterwards, or during the course of the latter half of the semester and afterwards. I said, so how does this compare? And they said, it really sucks. I mean, the conversation is okay, although it's somewhat different because you have no sense of what other people are thinking about what you say, because you don't hear anything. You don't. There isn't any. People don't cheer or. And so people can't jump into the conversation. It has to be moderated, like with the raise the hand function. So there's that. But they said that's not the big thing. The big thing is, I should say, the class is really demanding. So before every class, every kid in the class has to write 500 words about 4 questions that I'll post on Blackboard for the upcoming class. So every Sunday night and every Thursday night, all of my kids in the honors dorm everybody would be working on my class and answering the questions, and they would all talk to one another for 2 hours on Sunday night and on Thursday night in advance of class. And then when class was over, they'd all go have lunch together and continue to talk about it. So just for my class, and they come by my office, which is right down the hill from the classroom, and visit with me about it. So just for the class alone, that's a different thing. But they're living here, so their entire life is one way or another, depending on what sort of place it is. And at Catholic University, just to give you a couple of examples, at the beginning of the semester, the conventual Franciscans who run our campus ministry go around to the residence halls and bless rooms. You put a sign up. You want your, it's sort of like Passover. Put a sign on your door if you want the Father Jew to come by and bless your room. And everybody gets their rooms blessed. In Advent, in Lent, the priests come around to the dorms and hear confessions in the dorm. We bring confession to you. On the campus, there's 12 or 13 masses every day in Caldwell Chapel, in the Law School Chapel, in the Business Schools Chapel, at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. People live life like that. The work of campus ministry, the work of athletics. After we shut down, I found that there was a prayer group among the athletes that would meet every Thursday night. So I met with them on Zoom, but it wasn't, it just wasn't the same. The human relations that are the big part of your faith formation when you're growing up in a family are the same thing at the university. And this just doesn't do it. Imagine raising kids this way. It wouldn't work. You can't, well, anyway. So, of course, everybody is paying attention to this now that we're running a higher education world virtually. And I think everybody's finding that something is missing. Places like this that see half of our job as the formation of our students are really finding it's not working on TV.
Thank you. Yeah, Cheryl, go ahead with your question. Oops, Cheryl, you're
Cheryl,
muted.
you're on. You're
Mute. I think I should be unmuted now.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, President Garvey, for sharing, especially for sharing your course on the virtues you did in your keynote presentation as well. And I love that you ended with this hope, and you felt that the students in this course, the freshmen in the honors program, would not only be able to serve God and country, but they may also change the world. And I hope I haven't misstated that. And how do you see these students who have been educated with the Catholic culture and virtues? How do you see them changing the world? And do you see that through social justice? How do you see it? Because you had also said that there are various disciplines that they're studying.
Yeah. Let me say a couple of things about that. One is, I find it really inspiring. I mean, this is an ironic thing. I'm the president. I'm a teacher in the school, and so you think that it'll work the way it does in families when you're raising children. That the direction, the inspiration, the instruction all goes this way. You know, from the top down. My wife and I have started to find with our own children who are now grown, and I find with the students at the university that it works the other way almost as well. You know, that I find myself being inspired by the activities and the faith of our own students. I spend a lot of time with them. We live on this room that you're looking at here is my office. My bedroom is 10 feet in that direction, and we live right on the campus. So we often will eat with the students. We go to morning mass at the Basilica, and there's a bunch of kids, some from my class, who will go to the 7 or 7:30 mass that we go to. I've gone to World Youth Day with the students to Madrid, to Rio, to Krakow. So I go to the athletic contests of all. This is Division III, so it's not big time sports, but it's fun, and the kids really get a bang out of it. Anyway, I have found, for my own part, like in going to World Youth Day, that the prayer life, or the personal life of the students here is really inspiring to me. I think, gosh, you know, who am I to be telling these kids how to behave? I don't know that I'm living up to what their expectations ought to be for their president. So I think that one way they're going to change the world is just what they're doing for their classmates and for their president and teachers. They are evangelizing by living their own lives and setting an example of what a faithful, hopeful Catholic does. This is really the work that Vatican II and Lumen Gentium sets out for the laity. Their job isn't just to, you know, occasionally be readers at Mass or serve on parish councils, but the work of preaching the gospel is something that is the responsibility of lay people, not just the priests and bishops. So that's one way that they'll change the world. Another way they will is, this is a university. There are a lot of small Catholic colleges these days that are trying to recover a genuine Catholic spirit for their own schools, and I think they do a lot of good work. This is a university, though. Half of our students are graduate students, and so we have 12 different schools, not just philosophy and theology and canon law, but also law and engineering, arts and sciences, nursing, architecture, and so on. So they're going into all kinds of fields and being leaders in their fields. And one of the lessons that I'm always trying to teach to the bishops, this is, I should say, about Catholic University for those who haven't been here or don't know the school. Most of the Catholic universities in America are the gift of religious orders like the Benedictines, the Franciscans, the Jesuits have a couple of dozen, or the Ursulines, the Sisters of Mercy. But there are a few that are diocesan schools like Seton Hall or University of San Diego. But this is the National University of the Catholic Church. It was begun by the bishops of the Catholic Church. They resolved, those of you who are my age, when you were in grade school will have studied the Baltimore Catechism. It's called the Baltimore Catechism because Baltimore was the first see in the United States. The Archdiocese of Baltimore was the home of the Catholic Church, and the bishops would meet there. So they did this in the first part of the 19th century. They did right after the Civil War, the Second Baltimore Council. And the Third Baltimore Council in the 1880s did three really important things. It created the parochial school system. And the bishops in those days just ordered Catholics, send your kids to the Catholic schools, and they had to do it. So imagine trying that nowadays. The second thing they did was to write the Baltimore Catechism. And the third thing they did was to create the Catholic University of America. They said we need a national university, not for college, but for, you know, if priests or religious wanted to get a form of higher education, you know, postgraduate studies, they had to go to Louvain or to Rome to get it. There wasn't any place in America that did that. In fact, there weren't graduate schools in America. Harvard, Yale, Columbia were colleges that trained boys to be good citizens. Johns Hopkins was started about 10 years before us. And Hopkins was begun after the German model as a graduate school. So we began as a graduate school, and wasn't until the 20th century that we first admitted undergraduates. Anyway, for that reason, we have a much wider scope of to our educational enterprise and higher intellectual ambitions for our students. And I think that going into the important thing that I sometimes have to emphasize to the bishops is that the work of Catholic education is not just teaching people philosophy and theology and occasionally canon law. The work of spreading the gospel is, you know, like the humanities at Portsmouth Abbey, art and architecture and music, and these are how people fall in love with the gospel. It isn't from reading St. Thomas Aquinas, no offense to his fans, of which I'm one, but you know, that's kind of dry stuff. You gotta, this is what I was trying to say about as true in aesthetics as it is in ethics. You got to fall in love with it first. You got to think, man, give me some of that. That's what my virtues course is about. Sorry for such a long answer, Cher.
It's wonderful, and I think that's very, you know, I think it's also very Benedictine. There's something very Benedictine to that. You know, the habits and the literary experience of in some degree leading to the belief. Speaking of which, I think Abbot Matthew or one of the monks has a question here that they can ask. Go for it.
President Garvey, I was very impressed by your talk the other day. I spent many years in this school teaching Christian doctrine, and I constantly think to myself, now that I've long retired from it, how miserable a job I did, and how I should have done it this way, or I should have done it that way. I should have said more about this thing. But the thing that is upsetting me at the moment about Catholic education is that I understand, or I understood, that Catholic grade schools and universities and colleges were found so that Catholics actually go out into the world and influence the world in the direction of the gospel and Catholic truth. It seems to me, however, that the opposite happened, or that is, the world was smuggled in many ways into the Catholic school system and the university. And now it's the world that informs the Catholic education, except in these places, except it would seem in CU. But and one more aspect of that is, I would like to know if and how you confront questions of morality, including governmental and financial and but also sexual morality among your students? Because again, my impression is that young Catholics who have been more formed by their culture, popular culture, Catholic truth, that in many ways agree with culture in moral issues. Well, just to take one, homosexual marriage, and not Catholic teaching. What I'm asking is, one, you think we have given in far to the worldly culture, and how do you approach it if you can with your students?
You know, what you say is really true, Abbott. And I think that Catholic institutions, universities, colleges, high schools to some extent, have fallen down on the job in saying, you know, we're Catholic, but of course, that doesn't mean that we don't love non-Catholics, or that doesn't mean that we are opposed to academic freedom, or that we suppress ideas here. We believe in academic freedom, where we're open and so on, all of which is true, but it's so, if that's the best thing we have going for us, that we're in favor of academic freedom, or that we don't oppress or suppress other ideas, we're no different from, well, we are different from Yale in that respect nowadays, but we're not different from any good liberal arts or public university. We need our own. We need to have our own case. You know, it's not just what we don't do. We need to tell people, okay, here's what we do that's different from people. We need to offer an alternative to the culture, so that people will think, yeah, I hear what you're saying about that, but I really like what the Catholic Church is offering me. I don't know if you know this this website, ALETEIA. I don't. Some of you may see it. It's kind of pitched at, I don't know, the 18 to 35-year-old age group. So I got to know that, you know, this Magnificat. We used to get kids when our kids went off to college, we'd buy them a subscription to this because it fits in a jeans pocket. Anyway, the group that does this, Pierre Dumont, has this website called ALETEIA, and that's what its pitch is. Its pitch is not this is bad, or this is bad, or we you know, we believe in all kinds of things like the culture does, but rather here's some great things about being Catholic, which is really interesting and kind of appealing and, you know, sort of chic actually. You know, here's why you ought to. We gave an honorary degree to the guy who runs this website a year ago, and it was part of an effort to do that same thing, to say, this is my class on the virtues is like this. It's not a philosophy or theology class. It's mostly about film and novels and that sort of thing. And we spend time on all of the, like on the virtue of temperance. We do a couple. I always have a Benedictine monk. You'll be happy to know. When we start doing the virtue of temperance, I have somebody come and talk about the rule of Saint Benedict for. You know, what's the point of having rules about how much you can eat and how much you can drink? And what's it got to do with humility anyway? What is this humility stuff in chapter 7? And then we do we see this film by Morgan Spurlock called Supersize Me. It's the thought behind the film is a guy undertakes to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner at McDonald's for a month every day, and if the person at the counter asks him to supersize, then he's got to do that. So, he talks about how bad it is for his cholesterol, for his weight, for his sex life, for his, so these are two different classes. And what I want the kids to do is to think, was that what St. Benedict was worried about? Was he watching his figure? Was he concerned about his sex life? Or was there another point to what he was doing? Then we do, I have him read a short piece by Rene Girard called Anorexia and Mimetic Desire, about eating too little rather than too much, and what's up with that. Then we do a bunch of classes on sex. I have a friend of mine, Mary Eberstadt, has written a book called Adam and Eve After the Pill, and I have her come and talk about what college life is like. You know, she's a kind of sociologist that describes this. And we spend a class on right after Humani Vitae was written. Elizabeth Anscombe, a famous British philosopher, wrote a piece called Contraception and Chastity about was the Catholic Church nuts in saying that people shouldn't use artificial forms of contraception, or if you know, what's the point of having a rule like that? Then we spend a week on lust for things rather than for sex or food. One year I had him read The Death of Ivan Illich. Another year I had him read the Tom Wolfe novel, The Bonfire of the Vanities. Sometimes I'll just have him buy a current copy of Vanity Fair, a magazine that sells, you know, stuff, and talk to them about so this is what the culture is offering you. You ought to buy all of this stuff. You ought to get this kind of phone, this kind of car, these kind of shoes, this sort of perfume, this, what's up with that? I mean, what, is that what you want? Or anyway, so we're trying to offer them an alternative to how to live. And that's what I meant by saying that it's really why I think that Aristotle is right in saying that the intellectual conclusions that you reach are going to be formed earlier in the process by what you want. What is your heart longing for? And we got to sell that to kids. And you know, we're kind of starting at the beginning nowadays.
I see Alicia has a question. Alicia, go for it. If that's, sorry if I pronounced that wrong.
No, it's correct. Well, my name is Alessia, and I'm from Manquehue movement in Chile. I wanted to ask, in terms of bad habits, you said that if we fall into bad company, we develop a distaste for good, and after a while, we are led out of the path altogether. Do you think we have these bad habits from inside ourselves, or that we tend to develop them because of the society we live in and how it works? And like we're talking about Saint Benedict also, do you think these bad habits can be educated, or that they are just part of us, like intrinsically?
I love the question, and I think it's actually both parts of this. I think that what the doctrine of original sin actually means is that we've got this inside of us. All of this stuff about the culture that I was condemning, I want this stuff like everybody else. You know, I mean, there's a reason why people are led so easily down these paths, because sin is attractive that in its own way. About the company, I think that the combination of our own inclinations and bad company is the fatal combination. In raising our own children, Jeannie and I always paid very close attention to who their friends were. This was true when they were little, you know, when we were arranging play dates for them or having kids over to the house, but it was also true in high school. In college, when they got outside the house, we were really interested in meeting their friends and seeing were they in the right company. We're finding that it's true now that they're 35 years old. We still pay attention to who you're hanging out with. You know, do you have nice couples? Do they have nice kids? What's their faith life like? Because if your friends don't do it, you won't do it. And if your friends have good habits, you'll follow them. This is what I meant earlier about the layperson's obligation to preach the gospel, or what Lumen Gentium said, or how our students are going to change the world. They're going to carry this right message out to everybody. So I think that it's both. Yeah.
Bill Rooney, I see you have a question. Hop on.
Thank you, Chris. I don't really, my name is Bill Rooney. I don't have an affiliation to offer, other than to say, President Garvey, that we share a law background. I've practiced law for many years and have a strong academic interest. I'd just like to start by offering a word of encouragement. I think you do tremendous work at the Catholic University of America. You are right that there are a number of smaller colleges that are really trying to develop the Catholic intellectual tradition. But I think that CUA is really leading the way in universities of scale. And that's a very difficult thing to do, but I think you're doing a wonderful job. And so congratulations on that. I also thought that your podcast was very well done, and I appreciated your several references to trying to develop the Catholic intellectual tradition at CUA as an alternative to that which is on offer in society at large, and particularly with an alternative vision of reality, which is quite important, I think, these days. But I think we'd all recognize that there are many so-called Catholic universities that are only nominally so, and they have sort of strayed from the Catholic intellectual tradition, maybe under the banner, as you say, of academic freedom, or maybe hospitality to other views, or charity, what have you. But perhaps one of the strongest objections comes from Monsignor John Tracy Ellis of CUA in his seminal article in the 1950s, in which he speaks of a Catholic ghetto. And 3 times over, in fact, in his commentary on American Catholics and the intellectual life. And I think in the post-Vatican II and Land of Lakes world, there's a strong view that in higher academics, we need to, as you say, be open to other views, and we can't build a bulwark and sort of be insular and self-referential. And often invoking the word ghetto, which seems to me to be ideologically charged in a negative way. It's not community, it's not enclave, it's not area of common interest to engage the culture, but there's constantly the view that it's going to be self-referential and it's going to be less quality than you will have at a secular university. And so I wonder how you balance, or how you would respond to someone who says to you, you're building a Catholic intellectual tradition at the Catholic University of America, but at the end of the day, that project is going to end up with an insular Catholic ghetto that will not engage the culture.
Yeah, that I think is the strongest argument against what we're trying to do here. But I think it's empirically false. I think about the great intellectual movements that we're familiar with that began or grew out of universities. Maybe the best example is the Chicago School of Economics. The Chicago School of Economics started in the 50s, probably. It took the view that that markets work, that government interference will suppress growth, that people will be better off if the government maintains a light hand and stays back from how things are doing. Now, this is the opposite of Keynesian economics. It's the opposite of what we're seeing right now, actually, with the Congress popping for $1 billion to deal with the coronavirus, although there are certain kinds of problems that only government is capable of dealing with. But anyway, the Chicago School has produced dozens of Nobel Prize winners from their faculty, from their graduate students, from people who have gone through that program. Paul Douglas, who was a member of their faculty before he became a senator from Illinois, used to complain about Frank Knight's running the program. He said, you know, there's nobody like me around here. There are no Keynesian economists. They have a different view. And of course they did. You know, that they were trying to develop a school and learn from one another. And now there are alternative schools of thought, but it became great because they've tried to create, because they had a vision of what they wanted, and they invited people to come and join in that project. Here's another example. The most famous architectural movement in the first half of the 19th century was the Bauhaus movement. This is started in Europe. People like Walter Gropius. The Bauhaus architecture is, straight lines, black and white, not much color, functional sorts of things. You look at any big city, it's full of buildings that are influenced by the Bauhaus school of thought. Bernini would never have been hired by the Bauhaus school. They were not about ornamentation or beautiful things. They were about simplicity, functionality, different kinds of materials, and so on. But if there's an important architectural movement in the 20th century, it's the Bauhaus school. Or think about the Yale School of Literary Criticism, or the Cambridge School of Political Thought, or the Frankfurt School. All of these movements invited people to join them who were interested in that intellectual project. There is an alternative vision that says that every university ought to be like every bag of M&Ms, and it ought to represent every school of thought and point of view and so on. But none of schools like that don't produce great intellectual movements. They don't change the world. That's how it is with Catholic University, or with the Catholic vision that I'm proposing. Surely the Catholic Church's intellectual tradition has as much to offer as the Chicago School of Economics, or the Bauhaus School of Architecture, or the Frankfurt School of Political Theory. But it's got to be Catholics who are going to carry the ball. I mean, I forget whether in the podcast I gave this example, but it's like, imagine that we're on this, that all of us on this podcast are sitting around a table working on a jigsaw puzzle. It's important that we all see what one another is doing, because if it's one puzzle that we're working on, then every advance that the abbot makes in putting his pieces together will make new moves possible for other people working on the same puzzle. It's not like we're all sitting around a table shelling peas. There we could be in our separate rooms and doing our own thing, and we wouldn't increase our pace or success just by doing it together. But if we're working on the same puzzle, then it's important that we see each what the other is doing. That's how it is with building an intellectual movement at a university. Let me give one more example. I don't want to be tedious about this, but there's a great book by Karl Schorske called FIN-DE-SIECLE Vienna. And it's about how intellectuals at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century living in Vienna used to hang out together in coffee houses. Freud and Klimt and Schoenberg, and not much later Wittgenstein, and these people would talk to one another. They worked in different fields. Freud was a psychoanalyst, Klimt was a painter, but Schorske talks about how the notion of the subconscious influenced both of them. I mean, they obviously were talking to one another, and one worked it out in his painting, another worked it out in his psychoanalysis. That's the way it is at a university when people are engaged in the same project. So yeah, to say that now, it's a different thing to say, imagine we're working on the crossword puzzle and one person is in charge of where everybody puts the different pieces. Then it's not going to work. It's important that we work independently, but inside of one another, cooperatively. So we believe in intellectual freedom. Each person ought to be able to work out his or her part of the puzzle in the way that he or she does. But we're working on the same project. the analogy is a good one because there's a solution to a puzzle. There's a right answer, and we're working toward that. But we don't want people saying, no, don't ask that question, or don't go there. So we really do believe in intellectual freedom, but we're hiring people who are interested in the Catholic project. That's what we're doing here. That's why we're called the Catholic University of America rather than the Bauhaus School of America.
Well, I'd like to try to get in one more question if we can. Danielle's been waiting patiently. So Danielle, why don't you ask your question, then we'll wrap up.
Okay, sure. Hi.
Hi.
So grateful to be here. And I just can't thank you enough for this space. I'm a social worker and I'm also a psychotherapist. And so this kind of and I'm Catholic, so this intellectual discussion feels so exciting and invigorating to me, but not my norm. So, but my question, as I've been listening to this conversation in your podcast, and I have a short story to illustrate my question. I hope I can share it quickly, but specifically, like, what could be the Catholic intellectual tradition's response for the current, what I kind of am thinking of as sort of like the new civil rights movement, the 20s, regarding racism and racial awareness and reconciling with the real roots of slavery in this country. And the reason I ask that is because on Instagram, like a true millennial, I participated in a social media campaign called Rend Your Hearts, and it was started by 2 Black Catholic women. And it was an invitation to pray the sorrowful mysteries and to reflect and sort of experience, I guess, call it like a repentance or conversion within our own selves first, to look at, and I know personally speaking, just the ways in my own life I've inadvertently excluded voices or pushed out other ways of thinking because, not intentionally. But so I thought of, as this discussion was going, I was thinking mostly of what Catholicism can uniquely offer the culture and the world. And I thought that this was such a beautiful example of a Catholic way of responding to the current historical and political circumstances. And I thought there was really an invitation there to do something unique in the space. And then my other question following up on that is also what virtues, or for me, I feel like the virtue of fortitude has been one that's been with me at this time, but do you see any virtues that might be helpful in this particular moment in our society?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I'm glad you asked it. As it happens, I just had a meeting with my cabinet yesterday to talk about what kinds of things we ought to be doing at Catholic University, arising out of the current crisis in race relations in the United States. And I said, here would be an interesting thing. Imagine that if we were to try to address this without using the words diversity and inclusion. This is what the culture is giving us, diversity and inclusion. As it happens, this was a really unfortunate launch, really bad timing. In November of 2018, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops published a pastoral letter on racism. They had been working on it for a number of years, and they had the misfortune to launch this pastoral letter at the November meeting of the Bishops' Conference in Baltimore that the Pope called off because this was the high point of the sexual abuse crisis, and they were going to make a proposal for including bishops in the Dallas Charter requirements. And the Pope said, well, let's have a meeting and talk about that. So all this sex stuff was going on and just overwhelmed what the bishops had been trying to say about racism. But the pastoral letter is a really wonderful pastoral letter, and it's very Catholic. Instead of talking about diversity and inclusion, diversity is it doesn't have the same moral valence as a Catholic approach, which the pitch in the bishop's letter is, let's talk about the equal dignity of all people as children of God, about the love that we should have for one another as brothers and sisters in Christ, and about justice as a cardinal virtue that that's being denied in these circumstances. And the letter addresses the issues of racism in those terms about dignity, equality, love, and justice. No mention of inclusion, no mention of diversity, because you know why should we subscribe to diversity? I don't know. It's a kind of aesthetic preference, you know. Why should we have a lot of colors rather than just black and white? That's a well, there are really important reasons why we should pay attention to people of all races. For one thing, these are all members of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church in America, you know, slice the Catholic Church at, I don't know, let's say 35 years old. The Catholic Church in America is not white. Most Catholics, but the majority of Catholics under the age of 25 are Hispanic or Latino. In Washington, D.C., a great number of them are African Americans. I'm the minority in Washington, D.C. I'm the minority. Most of the people on this call are minorities in the Catholic Church. We ought to be paying attention to it, first of all, because it's our church, but second of all, because all these people are children of God, and that's to treat them as any less, as not equal to one another in dignity or deserving of our fair treatment and love, it goes contrary to the message of the gospel. That the Catholic Church has more to say about this than anybody, and it should be saying it louder. I think that part of the responsibility of a Catholic Church is not to be, William was talking about being accused of the accusation that Catholic universities or colleges would be a kind of enclosed fortress walled off from the rest of the university and not allowing other people in. That's the wrong idea. We are really interested in the problems of the culture, and this is one of the important problems of the culture, and we have a lot to offer that's not being heard, or maybe that we're not saying loud enough. So it isn't. This is another example of what I mean by we need to have our own project. We can't just say. The Pope Francis is wonderful about this. He says, "Look, we're what you might call the right in the Catholic Church is always talking about sex and that sort of thing. They begin with the message, bad dog, don't do this, don't do that." And he said, that's not why people join the church, so that they can be denied things that they're lusting after. You need something that's beautiful about the church that attracts them. Well, that's how it is about this. Being Catholic is not just closing ourselves off from all of these problems. These are our problems, and the Catholic Church ought to be speaking about them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, President Garvey. Thank you for joining this great discussion where we can air out these questions. And if you have grandchildren, if you have children, Catholic University of America, President Garvey, you're doing an amazing job, and we'll send them your way. Thank you so much for joining. And everyone else will be back here at 2:15 for our final session with Father Augustine. But one more time, thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining me and inviting me. It's been lovely. My cousin Michael Garvey went to Portsmouth Abbey when it was a priory.
That's great. Wonderful. Family connection. Good. All right. I'm going to close this meeting, and then you can hop back on the Zoom link whenever you're ready at 2:15. So thank you all, and we'll see you back here shortly.